1981 might be remembered for the heavy hitters, but beneath the big titles was a wave of strange, nasty, and deeply atmospheric horror that's easy to overlook. Slashers were evolving, psychological thrillers were getting darker, and international oddities were slipping onto tape shelves late at night. This was a year where low-budget ambition and raw creativity thrived just outside the mainstream. Tonight we're digging into 10 more overlooked horror movies from 1981, the ones that didn't always get the spotlight, but absolutely deserve a second look. Bloody Birthday, 1981. Three children born during a solar eclipse grow up without empathy or remorse. By the time they turn 10, they are already manipulating adults and covering their tracks. When someone gets too close to the truth, they respond with calculated violence. Two local teens begin to suspect what is happening, which quickly puts them in danger. The film treats the concept straight, not as parody. The young performers play their roles with calm, controlled menace, which makes the behavior more unsettling than exaggerated evil would. The teen leads act as the audience viewpoint, slowly connecting the pattern behind the incidents. Director Ed Hunt keeps the suburban setting ordinary and bright, which contrasts sharply with the crimes. The story uses a light astrological explanation for the children's behavior, but does not dwell on it, letting the tension come from their actions instead of lore. Effects are practical and direct, with several memorable weapon-based kills staged in typical early 80s slasher style. Despite the age of the villains, the movie does not soften the danger, which is part of why it stands out. A boundary-pushing early 80s horror entry that remains effective through tone and commitment. Simple setup, sharp execution, and a premise that still feels uncomfortable in the best genre way. Madman, 1981. Few slashers capture the feel of campfire storytelling quite like Madman. Released in 1981, it begins with a group of counselors telling spooky legends around a fire. And when one of them carelessly calls out the name Madman Mars, they awaken a local legend who starts hunting them through the woods. It was a perfect fit for drive-ins and rental shelves, where horror fans were hungry for new masked killers and creepy folklore. What makes Madman stand out is its setting and atmosphere. Shot mostly at night in shadowy woods and dimly lit cabins, the film leans on darkness and sound to build dread. The hulking figure of Madman Mars, with his wild hair and oversized axe, feels less like a typical slasher villain and more like a backwoods boogeyman pulled straight from an urban legend. The story follows the expected slasher beats, counselors flirting, sneaking off, and meeting grisly ends. But the pacing and mood make it memorable. Director Joe Giannone uses long shots of the forest and eerie silence to turn the wilderness into a character of its own, creating a sense of isolation that still resonates. While it never achieved the fame of Friday the 13th or The Burning, Madman found a loyal cult audience. For horror fans browsing the shelves in the early 80s, it was the kind of hidden gem that promised simple, spooky fun, and it delivered. With its campfire origins and gritty atmosphere, it remains a perfect slice of the slasher era. Nightmare, 1981. A troubled young man escapes from psychiatric care years after witnessing his father murder his mother at home before taking his own life. He appears calm on the surface, but his instability quickly returns. As new murders begin, the film also follows a separate family, where a mother experiences vivid nightmares about a looming threat to her children. The two storylines run in parallel, with dreams and real events moving closer together. What first feels symbolic becomes immediate danger as the killer's path and the family's fears collide. Directed by Romano Scavolini, the film is staged in a stark, confrontational style. Baird Stafford plays the killer, with an unsettling mix of vulnerability and volatility, while Sharon Smith anchors the parallel family storyline. The acting is low-key and natural, which makes the violence feel harsher. The effects are practical and graphic, with extended attack scenes and close-up gore that go further than many early 80s horror films. The movie uses point-of-view shots and sound design to heighten the sense of pursuit. A controversial and extreme entry in early 80s horror, Nightmare became known for pushing content limits and sparking debate. Technically effective, but intentionally difficult viewing. Evilspeak, 1981. If you ever wondered what would happen if Carrie met the Exorcist inside a military academy, Evilspeak has your answer. And it's every bit as strange as it sounds. Released in 1981 and directed by Eric Weston, this movie became infamous on the UK Video Nasty List for its violence, blasphemy, and buckets of pig's blood. Clint Howard stars as Stanley Coopersmith, a bullied cadet who discovers an ancient satanic text hidden in the Academy's basement chapel. Using a computer to translate the Latin passages, Stanley accidentally resurrects a demonic spirit through digital sorcery, turning technology into a tool of hell. The concept feels ahead of its time, bridging old religion and new machines years before The Lawnmower Man or Pulse. Once the possession starts, Evilspeak goes completely off the rails. Decapitations, telekinetic rampages, and a climax involving demonized pigs that attack the entire academy. It's absurd, shocking, and unforgettable. The gore was so extreme that many scenes were cut for its initial release, only to be restored decades later when the uncut version resurfaced on disc. Despite its rough edges, the film has a strange sincerity. Clint Howard plays it straight, and the tone swings between tragic and chaotic. For horror fans growing up in the VHS era, Evilspeak was that movie you dared your friends to rent. It was banned, bootlegged, and whispered about, which only made it more appealing. Even today, it stands as a time capsule of 80s rebellion, the story of one kid who finally got even. With a little help from Satan and a Commodore computer. Night School, 1981. Boston's academic elite gets a deadly lesson in anthropology when a mysterious killer in black leather starts decapitating female students. As Lieutenant Judd investigates the connections between an exclusive women's night school and the mounting body count, he uncovers an anthropological theory being tested in the deadliest possible way. What makes Night School, aka Terror Eyes, distinct is its sophisticated approach to the slasher formula. Set against Boston's prestigious academic backdrop, the film explores themes of cultural rituals and primitive violence hiding beneath civilized society. The killer's weapon of choice, a ceremonial curved blade, isn't just for show. It's tied directly to the anthropological studies at the heart of the mystery. Rachel Ward makes her film debut as Eleanor, bringing both intelligence and ambiguity to her role as a teaching assistant, whose expertise in primitive cultures becomes increasingly relevant to the investigation. Leonard Mann's Lieutenant Judd provides a blue-collar contrast to the academic world, his street-smart detective work clashing with the Ivory Tower's theoretical approaches to violence. Director Ken Hughes, known primarily for sophisticated British thrillers, brings an unusual polish to the proceedings. The film's murder sequences are staged with clinical precision rather than exploitation-style excess. Each decapitation is treated almost like a ritual, with the heads later discovered floating in water, a detail that proves significant to the killer's methodology. The Boston setting is used to full effect, contrasting historic architecture with modern violence. Night School captures both the prestigious universities and the working-class neighborhoods, creating a complete picture of a city where old-world education meets new-world savagery. The night scenes in particular have a fog-shrouded quality that recalls Italian Giallo films. Night School proves that sometimes the most dangerous theories are the ones that escape the classroom, and that studying primitive rituals doesn't make you immune to primitive impulses. Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, 1981. A teenage boy is raised by his aunt after his parents die in a suspicious car crash. As he prepares to leave for college on a basketball scholarship, her behavior grows increasingly possessive and unstable. When she murders a man who rejects her advances, she frames her nephew for the crime. A violently homophobic detective becomes convinced of the boy's guilt, pursuing him relentlessly while the aunt's long-buried psychosis begins to surface. Directed by William Asher, the film quickly veers away from standard slasher territory into something darker and more uncomfortable. Susan Tyrrell delivers a fearless, unhinged performance as Aunt Cheryl, turning maternal devotion into something suffocating and grotesque. Jimmy McNichol grounds the story as the confused and hunted nephew, while Bo Svensson plays the detective with openly hostile intensity. The script confronts incestuous obsession and institutional homophobia directly, making it far more confrontational than most early 80s genre films. The violence is sudden and intimate, stabbings and blunt force attacks staged with practical effects that emphasize proximity rather than spectacle. Much of the horror comes from Tyrrell's presence and the oppressive domestic setting, where manipulation has been normalized over years. As the truth about the family history emerges, the film reframes itself as a study of control disguised as love. Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker is a slasher in name only. It's really a psychological thriller about obsession, repression, and moral rot hiding in plain sight. Tyrrell's performance is unforgettable, terrifying because she genuinely believes she's protecting what's hers. A disturbing, provocative cult classic that still feels confrontational decades later. The Survivor, 1981. Some disasters end in fire and wreckage. Others live on in the minds of those who walk away. In David Hemmings's 1981 film, The Survivor, tragedy is only the starting point, as survival becomes a curse steeped in mystery, guilt, and the supernatural. The story follows David Keller, the lone survivor of a devastating plane crash that claims his wife and many others. Emerging from the wreckage alive should feel miraculous, but for Keller, it sparks a spiral of visions and unexplainable events. He begins to see shadows where none should exist, hear voices in empty rooms, and witness objects appear and vanish, as if reality itself is slipping out of his grasp. Is he being haunted by the spirits of those who died, or is his own guilt rewriting the world around him? That uncertainty drives the film's tension, trapping both Keller and the audience in a haze where grief, trauma, and the possibility of the supernatural bleed together. Hemmings leans on atmosphere rather than spectacle. Interiors are cloaked in oppressive shadows, light flickers unnervingly, and every sound carries the suggestion of something lurking just beyond view. The pacing is deliberate, letting unease seep in gradually until even stillness feels threatening. As Keller encounters others who may or may not share his visions, the line between external haunting and internal collapse becomes impossible to define. By the climax, it's clear that the real horror isn't just the crash itself, but the weight of survival and the torment it brings. The Survivor stands out as a psychological ghost story, where the terror is as much in the mind as in the world beyond. It's haunting not for what it shows outright, but for the uncertainty it leaves behind, lingering long after the screen fades to black. Eyes of a Stranger, 1981. A Miami TV reporter starts to suspect her neighbor is behind a series of violent assaults and murders. As she quietly investigates, her attention tips him off. The danger shifts toward her younger sister, who is deaf and has limited vision, and who lives with her in the same high-rise building. Proving the truth becomes urgent as the threat moves closer to home. The film blends investigative thriller beats with close-quarter stalking tension. Much of the suspense comes from proximity, shared walls, nearby windows, and the feeling that help is never far away, yet never close enough. Lauren Tuez plays the reporter as focused and persistent, while a young Jennifer Jason Leigh stands out as the sister, giving the role strength and awareness rather than simple helplessness. John DeSanti portrays the suspect with grounded, low-key menace. Director Ken Wiederhorn keeps the tone serious and direct. Violence is portrayed more bluntly than in many slashers of the period, with practical effects and tight staging. Several sequences build tension around limited senses and defensive improvisation inside the apartment setting. A hard-edged early 80s thriller that leans into discomfort and suspense. Tough subject matter, but anchored by committed performances and effective staging. Absurd, 1981. A nearly unkillable murderer breaks free from a pursuing priest and continues a violent spree after surviving injuries that should be fatal. Even a catastrophic wound fails to stop him. After recovering in a hospital, He turns on the staff and then moves into a quiet neighborhood where a babysitter and a disabled girl become trapped in his path. The priest follows, knowing ordinary methods will not bring him down. The film plays like a loose companion piece to Anthropophagous, again featuring George Eastman as the central threat. This time the character is defined less by motive and more by endurance, presented as a relentless, almost unstoppable force. Most supporting roles are built around the home under siege setup. Director Joe D'Amato keeps the story simple and pushes the shock value forward. The pacing is built around pursuit and attack sequences rather than mystery. Dialogue is minimal. Tension comes from inevitability. Effects are practical and graphic, featuring multiple mechanical weapon kills and detailed wound makeup. Several scenes use power tools and bladed weapons, staged with lingering close-ups. The healing element is shown through prosthetic effects that suggest rapid recovery from major injuries, a raw example of early 80s Italian splatter cinema. Story is secondary to impact, with the emphasis squarely on brutality and endurance horror. Best suited for viewers exploring extreme corners of the genre. Lady Stay Dead, 1981. Set against the bright, deceptively calm backdrop of Sydney's suburbs, Lady Stay Dead is anything but sunny. Directed by Terry Bork in 1981, it takes the slasher formula and twists it into something more intimate and unsettling, a slow burn of obsession and violence. At the center is Gordon Mason, a handyman whose quiet, awkward demeanor masks a far darker side. He works at the Rocky Beach Motel, where his infatuation with his employer Marie begins to spiral. When Marie resists his advances, the situation turns horrific, leading to a brutal assault and her death. But the horror doesn't end there. Soon after, Marie's sister Jenny arrives, completely unaware of what has happened. She moves into the same home, at first enjoying its quiet charm, until she starts noticing strange details, small disruptions, unnerving behaviors, things that don't add up. Piece by piece, she begins to sense that she's living alongside a predator. Unlike many slashers of its era, Lady Stay Dead doesn't rely on constant bloodshed to scare its audience. Instead, it thrives on atmosphere and creeping dread. Empty corridors, subtle shadows, and the sense of being watched create a mood of paranoia. The performances keep the story grounded, making the violence feel disturbingly real rather than cartoonish. The pacing is deliberate, forcing viewers to sit in the tension as it builds. By the time the danger becomes unavoidable, the suspense is almost unbearable. What makes the film memorable isn't just the violence itself, but the way it captures obsession and the fragility of safety in familiar spaces. Behind the sunny facade of suburbia lies a nightmare, one that lingers long after the final scene. Lady Stay Dead may not be as well known as other horror titles of the early 80s, but it remains an unnerving reminder that true terror often comes from the people we least expect. That's 10 More Forgotten Nightmares from 1981, a mix of slashers, slow-burn thrillers, and pure VHS-era weirdness that helped define the early 80s in their own quiet way. Some were controversial, some were misunderstood, and some just slipped through the cracks. Which one stands out to you? And what did we miss from 81 that deserves to be in the conversation? Let us know in the comments. If you're enjoying these year-by-year deep dives, make sure you're subscribed. And remember, always be kind and rewind, because every movie is someone's favorite.